I'd next like to introduce Cassie Dewitt. She is a data science consultant at the Ford Motor Company. Cassie works to help develop and implement urban solutions that are people-focused. Her work combines utilization of strategy, current and emerging technology, and analytics. She's actively involved in urban analytics. Current passions and focus are the center of smart cities, urban mobility, urban planning, and technology. She is from Detroit, Michigan.
Good morning. How's everyone? So when I was preparing for this talk, I was Googling and I was like, what is a good way to start a talk/keynote? And I figured I'd start with a little story to give some context. I started in urban analytics in a kind of unique way. I was actively involved in the city of Detroit and its revitalization back when no one really wanted to be in Detroit. And I was volunteering in a park. We were digging post holes. And I backed into the post hole I had dug. Spent about a year recovering with physical therapy. And during that year, I was like, what am I going to do with myself? And I went to grad school for urban planning, where I studied under an economist, and he introduced me to all things data science. So I graduated. I really wanted to continue that. And at the time, the Detroit Fire Department was looking for a data analyst, which they ended up turning into a data science position. So what I'd like to talk to about, hold on a second. Okay. What I'd like to talk about, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I'd like to talk about today is a little bit about my background, what I'm doing currently, and my involvement in the space. Currently, I'm at Ford Motor Company. I'm working through tech systems for Ford. I focus on data sourcing and coordinating with the data scientists to talk about their needs and to identify sourcing needs, and also I work on vendor analysis. That's a fancy way of saying that I'm helping Ford on the business processes side. What this all means, including my experience at the Detroit Fire Department, is that I've learned to utilize analytics and technology to solve problems. I've incorporated cross-disciplinary focus in my work. I've failed some, I've succeeded some, and today I wanted to talk about utilizing urban data science to solve problems and how that can be applied to the private sector. So these are some big data terms, that everyone's familiar with in this room. I've been paying attention a lot to the space lately, looking at what data scientists are doing, but not just data scientists, data architects, data strategists, business people. And all these words are words that are floating out in popular articles that people use in their day-to-day lives. And I've looked at these words through things like websites, LinkedIn. Sometimes you see random articles on Facebook and in conversations with people. So what drives data scientists to big data? I'm obviously not speaking for the field right now, but what I've observed is that there's an interest in problem solving. The huge thing is there's a passion for curiosity, a an appreciation of technology and applying it to problems, and a desire to make big data useful. No data scientist becomes a data scientist to crunch numbers and not to have results of their value. However, what I've been discovering time and time again is that that is a challenge that the field is tackling right now. And what's been going on in the field is that some companies, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, are responding to this by saying things like, what's the ROI? That's an extremely precarious space to be in because you're suddenly stuck proving the value. And how do you respond to that as a company? How do you respond to that as professionals? So where does passion intersect business priorities? There's a motion towards business vision, an application of analytics to resource optimization. And just a word on the resource optimization, there's resource optimization in the private sector and there's resource optimization in the public sector. In the public sector, what happens is the budget is set every year and you're serving your constituents, which are usually the residents or the business owners in a boundary of a city or a rural area, if that applies to you. And you're limited by that. And so there's tremendous value in optimizing those resources and using them more efficiently, because if you can use them more efficiently, what this does, and this somewhat can be applied to the private sector, is it frees up funds where you can improve quality of life in different areas. So the third one is interest in creation of products. So what are the first principles that need tackling? I think they're identify a reason for analytics, understand what analytics will be used for, and the implementation of the appropriate skill sets. Unfortunately, I think we're in a space where we need to think, why do we need analytics, and to better ask why. And this isn't me placing the blame on corporations or on cities. I just think we need to return to that time and time again, because sometimes in the technology space, we get so lost in the details that we need to back up and look at things from a high level view. So I conducted a survey on LinkedIn. There were about 100 responses, and I wanted to know where do people, and by people I mean data scientists, data architects, technologists, think the field is heading? And I got a lot of responses, and they were very interesting responses. And the projected future focus areas were automation, collaboration, ROI, which I just mentioned, machine learning, production engineering, product development. And then the challenges were gut-based decisions, lack of data-driven culture, minimal synergy, low return generation, ill-equipped to log data. There's hope at the end. Insight lost as insight moves upward. So if it gets to the vice president or president or CEO of a company, that insight is sometimes lost in the mix. Lack of creativity and not aligned with speed of management. However, what I noticed on that LinkedIn, and I want to emphasize this, is that organizations and data scientists are starting to observe a change that is occurring, and that is cross-collaborative teams. So what I heard was that data scientists were suddenly having the opportunity to be members of teams that included data architects and UX designers and a traditional data analyst and a project manager. And I think that creates opportunity for change for some of the problems that we've been hearing so far this morning. So these are my survey results. The top one was production engineering. Basically, that means technological products. And then there was ROI and machine learning. But before that, there was collaboration. I'm really interested in collaboration because I think it gives an opportunity to contribute skill set if your skill sets are out of the traditional role. And it allows you to think about how that can create additional value. So I mentioned some of this already, but digging a little bit deeper, as any data scientist would, I dug out 3 areas. One is production, the second is collaboration, and the third one is ROI and machine learning. I grouped ROI and machine learning together because one thing that I've been noticing is that companies are starting to talk about selling their machine learning models and their machine learning processes. So we have automatic systems focus, emphasis on at-scale solutions. There was a mention of John Deere and customer products. And then there's collaboration. One person mentioned qualitative researchers. There was the obvious need of data scientists. They should clean, structure, sort, and filter data. I thought that was very interesting because usually when we talk about data scientists in the field, we talk about them creating the insights, but there is this gap of, and I don't know the answer to this, does a data scientist clean, structure, sort, and filter data? Should there be automatic ETL processes? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I approached analytics at the Detroit Fire Department. This by no means was perfect. Going backward, I probably would have improved it a little bit, but I always started with the operational problem, and I'll talk in a minute about how I identified that problem. Then when there was a prototype plan, review, finalize the plan, collected data, went through the standard methodology, and then the Dewitt and DFT critique, just to give you some context. Dewitt is an acronym for Department of Innovation and Technology, and they supplied a lot of technological experts. And I collaborated with them pretty heavily during my time at the fire department. So then we went through prototype improvements, scheduled validation, and the next problem. So this is the part that I learned. Initially, when I started at the fire department, I was not very good at as a data scientist about listening to the business problems. I wanted to jump right away to the model building and the analytics. And in the rush to do that, there's a lot of things that I missed. Traditional products that I learned was a modification of the department-wide dashboard. In the publication of the open fire data, so in the public sector, public analytics world, what happens when you publish open data is you publish it and it's open up to the whole world, and that opens you up for critique. And although as scary as that is, that's also an opportunity to improve your analytics. So that happened with the fire department. We went through several versions. And what I found was that there were errors in the data because with the fire data, what happened is fire personnel goes to a fire after they're called through the 911 system, and they put out the fire, and then they fill out a report. Well, if they don't fill out the report correctly, what happens is it's incorrectly entered into the database. And so I worked hand in hand with the commissioner of the fire department for correcting these issues. What happened after I learned how to listen was that I was suddenly able to prioritize problems. And I listened through, and I have some examples up here, weekly cabinet meetings, weekly key staff meetings, monthly community meetings, and one-on-one meetings. Okay, so the weekly cabinet meetings is where we weekly reviewed metrics. And they were performance metrics set by the commissioner that coincided with the mayor's vision. The key staff meeting, and that's actually a typo, it's monthly key staff meeting. It's where it was a public meeting that was open up to everybody. Most of the time, those in attendance were cabinet members and DFD personnel, so fire personnel. And then the community meetings were held by the mayor, and you were able to hear citizen concerns. And I folded those into my analytics. So I would be remiss if I didn't kind of like enumerate on some things that I found on listening. Listen first without judging. Be aware of biases. Take notes and request confirmation of summary. Walk through the problem statement with the client and problem owner. So what I would do is listen in the meetings or listen in the one-on-one conversations, develop a problem statement, and then bring it back to the clientele. And that created a cyclical relationship. So it suddenly wasn't me conducting analytics and giving them an output. I was able to work with them to help them solve the problems. Okay, so in my work, one thing that I've noticed is that there's 3 types of problems that analytics can be used for. There's information, decision, and solution. With information, they're problems characterized by a need for actionable intelligence. Decision is problems characterized by a decision that must be arrived at. And a solution is problems in need of a solution, most usually in the combination of technology and data. So an example of a solution would be when New York City prioritized building inspections by rate of risk for fire if they couldn't get at all of them. And they did that through a mapping system and an algorithm. So this is how I developed my methodology. I started with an operation problem. I developed the problem into a problem statement. I researched how other cities have solved the problem. I haven't seen this as much in the private sector, but in the public sector, what's happened is problems are very common. So the city of Detroit has similar problems, I'd say, with Pittsburgh, for example. And so if you can look at how analysts and data scientists have solved those problems in Pittsburgh and apply them to Detroit and scale in the appropriate way, it's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And then you move on to deciding on how the problem will be tackled, project questions, determining resources, developing statistical and technical methods, and then packaging the methodology. So moving on to some work samples. The first one that I'll talk about is the Analyze Boston Open Data Challenge. So a big issue with cities is kind of like weather crises and crime crises and things that kind of take you by surprise. And so approaching it through intelligence, the way that the federal government does, is very applicable in cities. And so what I wanted to do was develop a beta insights monitor that could look at the effect of weather in the city of Boston and develop intelligence that could eventually be built into a live prototype for helping the city of Boston prepare for weather. So why weather in the city of Boston? Like, why was that my first project? The reason is because I found out that the city of Boston is very affected by their weather, like very emotionally affected. Just like in the city of Detroit, we're very affected by vacant property. So coinciding with that are a series of maps. The different colors represents and I apologize, my title got cut off, but the last part is by neighborhood. And it's basically fire calls by neighborhoods in different areas of the city. So the first section is January 26 to 28. The second map is February 7th through 10th. And then we have 311 by neighborhood, which 311 calls, for reference for everybody, is when a citizen logs a complaint. It's usually by an app on a phone, or they can call into a hotline number in the city of Boston and log if there's like a huge trash baskets, for example, on the freeway, and someone needs to remove it. Or if there's like a flooding incident the city needs to know about. And then we have crime as incidents. And so when I developed this further, one thing I want to explore is the relationship of crime incidents to 311 calls to fire calls. Okay, so moving on to Detroit Fire Department work. I have two sets of slides that kind of go through some of the things that I used analytics for. The first one is a data quality program. Not fun. It's kind of not sexy to talk about, but it's very important in the field of data analytics. There's Engine 49, which in the city of Detroit, post-bankruptcy, what was happening was there were some fire stations that were sold, and one of the fire stations that the city council was debating of whether to sell was called Engine 49. They ended up deciding through analytics that and applying that to decision making to not keep it, and they ended up selling it. And then there's ISO analysis. So to give everybody some context, what happens when you purchase a house is there's a thing that a fire department gets called an ISO score. And it basically tells the insurance company at what percentage of time a fire department can extinguish a fire on time. So as you can imagine, that affects the insurance you pay. And so everybody wants to be at a 1. And what I was using analytics for was to help them determine how to get that to a 1. So I spoke a little bit about the fire department metric review and the open data portal. And then campaign intelligence. This is kind of like where it all comes together with decision making. But in the city of Detroit, as everybody knows, there is a high amount of arsons. And so what Mayor Duggan very successfully has done is launched a campaign that integrates Homeland Security, Detroit Police Department, Detroit Fire Department, American Red Cross, and citizen volunteers for the sole purpose of getting those arsons down. And so you report out every hour on building fires, and you kind of closely track what's going on with the data to make sure that everyone's safe and secure and the buildings are safe and secure, and anything suspicious is immediately reported to the correct agency. So tools that I use were ArcGIS and Esri for spatial analytics. Performance metrics. This took me a second to get used to, but I came into the Detroit Fire Department wanting to use R and Python and Tableau, but what I found was that when you're helping an organization become data-driven, one of the things that's really, really important is to meet them where they're at. And they loved Excel. Like, they wanted to make dashboards out of Excel. And I realized that that's what works for that agency. So even though we had a copy of Tableau, what we did was our first dashboards were made out of Excel, and eventually they got more complicated, but that's where we started. Okay, so how can big data be applied to cities? Taking a step back, I have some stats for everyone. 50% of the world's population lives in cities today. Big data can be used to help remedy congestion, which is a huge thing in mobilities. Every city deals with congestion, but the biggest cities deal the most with it, including New York City, Chicago. So people that are here from Pittsburgh, I'm guessing you deal with congestion when you're going home at 5 or in the morning or sporadically, like throughout the day during events. And what the field has kind of been finding out in general is that forecasting improvements of congestion and behavior nudging can help to solve some of those problems. For example, IBM is helping the city of Dublin use big data for traffic congestion. So as I've been thinking, how can big data better be used for people? And how can we take the opportunity of the field changing to think about ways to improve it? And by people, I don't just mean how I've just been talking about, which is with cities. I also mean meeting clients' needs and helping businesses solve the problems that they want to solve and helping them think about prioritizing those issues and when analytics can help with those problems. So at recalling the survey, what we found is that there's a forecasted disruption. There's a future focus on production and engineering. There's a collaboration focus. And then there's the third focus areas of ROI and machine learning. What I've also been finding is that there's an evolving data consumption. Very recently, maybe like within the last year, what I've been noticing is that you don't have to sell as much on the power of analytics and technology. People are hungry for it. And that changes things a little bit, along with developed software that has started to be implemented in general in the field. And so people want to use data and technology to solve problems. This also means that there's a room for creative applications, an opportunity for placing the user first, an opportunity for directly integrating the voice of the customer, and an opportunity for improving the way data scientists work. When I was at the fire department, initially, I fought very hard to just focus on coding and to focus on our codes. But what I realized and what I learned is that work can be accomplished a different way through very highly collaborative teams. And I think that what I've been noticing is that trend is starting to change, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector as well. So desirable products that people love that allow them to have empowerments. And what I mean by that is understanding insights and how they can apply these insights to implement their vision and goal. There is nothing as magical to a CEO or director of a business than be able to understand those insights and to have the satisfaction of solving that problem. There's also solutions, which is I put as a derived satisfaction of a problem being solved or a solution being obtained. And thirdly, I've talked about this a little bit, there's optimization or a more efficient use of resources that gives individuals the freedom to gain revenue to further accomplish goals. So I've been leading a lot on creativity lately, and I realize this isn't something normally that integrates with the tech field. I'm hopeful it eventually will. And 3 avenues of creativity that I have identified that are helpful to this field are new insight into old problems, creative application of solutions, and phased risk of solutions. We talk a lot about risk in technology and the tolerance of risk, but I think actually it needs to be approached carefully when you're in charge of revenue and implementing analytics, but not so carefully that you're stagnant and not moving forward. Creative applications of solutions. This is really the fun part of like taking the analytics and the technology. It doesn't always have to be analytics. It can sometimes be focused more on technology and thinking of creative ways to solve those solutions. What I think has been happening is that when you have a collaborative team, which goes back to the cross collaboration we've been talking about, you can use that to come up with creative solutions. Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that issue. I think the last talk like slightly hinted at this of data ethics in the age of big data. It's an issue that's been coming up. I think my personal viewpoint is that is an issue that we need to pay a lot more attention to. I also think algorithms are coming at us with some ethic issues that we're going to have to consider. How do we find to interpret those? So it's a universal issue. The private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector all share the challenge of data ethics. I think it starts with data scientists and every professional being aware of their own biases. And I also think it can help to remember that not everyone has the answers to these things all the time. And so I really want technical professionals and analytical professionals to remember that there is a huge data and technological community out there that's willing to explore solutions. And I think that's one of the more enjoyable things about this field. And the thing that I would suggest right now where we're at is to team up with machine learning experts because those are the people that can help you identify some of the ethical issues and things like algorithms. Okay, I think we're a little bit ahead of time, but for final thoughts, I don't think that big data analytics has to start with big data all the time. Sometimes, depending on the organizational needs, I think it can start small. Sometimes you don't have a choice and you absolutely have to start with big data. On data for people, I do think that the field may be changing soon. I think it does seem mostly to affect data scientists because some of the stuff is going to be automated. But But it also brings a unique opportunity to integrate people. And finally, ethics is being placed more and more at the forefront, and knowing how to respond is key. So I can take any questions or discussion.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. How about any questions or comments? Is that an interesting view? Yes, if you want to come up and just say who you are.
Hi, my name is Kunal, and I'm an IT consultant with CGI.
Hi.
So my question is, as a data scientist, what is your take on BI and big data? Like, is big data and BI the same? If they are same, then why big data? And if they are not, then how are they different?
So this is, I think, going to change by who you talk to, but I think that BI and big data are sometimes different, although not all the time. I really think it depends on the business needs and the problem that you're responding to. Does that answer your question? Yeah? At the fire department, we really didn't use big data that much. We used really large data sets, but I wouldn't say that big data was 100% integrated into what I worked on. And we worked a lot on BI.
I'm Doug Stone with CGI. Question about, were your studies at the city of Detroit, the fire department, were they able to take your analyses and determine what to do on Angels Night? So I think that used to be Devil's Night, right?
Yeah, so when I started at the fire department, Angels Night was already implemented. And so the role that I played was reporting hourly out to the mayor. But I also, there were moments where we would use, so for example, I was running hourly maps in ArcGIS, which is a mapping platform, and reporting those out to Arson. So we were like, this is so basic, but we were looking at hotspot maps to look at the hottest areas in the city of Detroit so they could send their limited manpower to those areas.
Vishu from PNC.
Hi,
I know you brought an interesting perspective here.
thanks.
You said ethics, right? Ethics in the context of
Yeah.
big data. Can you share with us an ethical dilemma in big data?
Well, I'm still learning a lot about ethics and like the broad overview, but one thing that I've noticed in general is that as a society is coming to grips with the fact that everybody's analyzing their data, and so I think qualitatively, as data scientists, we need to be honest about the ethical practices that we use on their analytics and their information. I think that's already being done. So for example, I've noticed there's a lot of companies that supply analytics to corporations, and instead of just selling the data, they've started to turn to how can we provide analytics that meet their needs versus selling data that has PII. But also, that part would be helpful if anybody wants to respond to that, because I'm still learning.
Okay.
Well, I know there's issues with ethics, like if you take a data set that has a bunch of biases in the data set and you analyze it and say, okay, here's who should get a loan.
Yeah,
And then the biases that are in the data set
Right.
come through your practices of who's getting the loan.
right. And also another one would be like if people are applying to college or universities? How can we make sure that those algorithms aren't being used for bad?
Get another hand up. Yeah.
I
Hi.
know that in the Pennsylvania area, a lot of governments don't want to do a lot of data analysis because they put a lot of corruption in the slow process of paper forms and non-data analysis. Did you deal with that at all in your environment where people didn't want the information being analyzed because it showed their faults and shortcomings?
Yeah, I think this is where it really helps for data scientists to be a little bit suave. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, how can you address their concerns and reframe the conversation as an opportunity for improvements? But also, what comes along with that is building trust. So, for example, you as a data scientist won't necessarily develop a reputation, and I hope not, for tattling on people if they're not performing, but using that as side conversations to give them an opportunity to think about, so like, how can we serve people better and improve how we're approaching work?
Okay, next question.
Yeah, so my question was, when you work in the fire department, right? So assume that for the work you did, like it involved like large volume of data. So what was your challenge in hosting and quickly retrieving this information for your algorithms and models? And did you use their existing infrastructure, or if you had to use like large volume of data, did you propose on moving to new infrastructure?
So I was a little bit spoiled at the fire department because the base of all fire and emergency data is what they call a CAD system, and is usually connected to a SQL database. And so a 911 call will come in at a certain time, and it will be logged, the timestamp that it comes in, the timestamp that it's routed to a dispatcher from the call taker, then the timestamp that and it goes down the line throughout the whole process to when they actually leave the field. And so, whereas you're implementing big data analytics in private organizations, and you have to be very intentional about the infrastructure that's built, it's almost a little bit intrinsic in the way emergency departments generate their data because they need it for their processes.
Any other comments or observations? All right, well, you're going to be around
Yeah,
for the rest
I
of
will.
the day, so you'll be able to talk. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.